Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants will be on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference. At that time, to ask a question from the phone lines, please press star 1 on your phone and record your name when prompted. This call is being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to your host, Anthony Sargis. Thank you, sir. You may begin.
Thank you, Victor. Appreciate it. Again, I'm Anthony Sargis with the U.S. Department of Commerce office in Middletown, Connecticut. I think we are actually at our last webinar for 2019, which is exciting. It's been a good year. We've offered a lot of training this year, including a lot of training during Export Week, I think last May, and webinars throughout the year. We did a couple last month. We did Export Docs last week. That was a seminar in Hartford, and we did an Incoterms 2020 update. So there's been a lot going on recently. I think there'll be a lot going on for 2020 as well. And I just want to emphasize that we're always open for different training ideas. A lot of times we have to bring in expert speakers on these topics, but if you have any ideas for different types of content, export education, please let us know. Today is the second part of creating a website for an industrial buyer, and today we're really going to focus on the globalization of your website. So we have 3 speakers for today. We're going to start off in a moment or two with Joe Sorrell, the president of Rapid Purge, small manufacturer out of Essex, Connecticut. I'm going to do my best to cover the website globalization portion for the U.S. Commercial Service. Our deck of 30 or 40 slides, we're going to go through that very quickly and cover that. And there's also more to that, and I will share that full deck of, I think it's 80 or 90 slides with everyone after today's presentation, so you won't miss any of the stuff that we had to kind of trim on. And then Annie Pagano is brand strategist with Interpreters and Translators out of Glastonbury, Connecticut, is also going to speak and cover her material as well. Just a couple housekeeping items before we begin. You may type in questions if you'd like. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little cloud Q&A box. If you have a question throughout today's presentation, you can shoot those over written, or you can wait till the end of the presentation and ask those questions verbally, and Victor will prompt us on the way to do those verbal questions. But I'm going to turn it over to Joe Sorrell, president of Rapid Purge, to begin, and he's going to talk a little bit about his experience and the results from his company's perspective regarding digital marketing. So, Joe?
Thank you, Tony. I think I'd like to first say that I am not a digital marketing expert. This is not my field. I am a manufacturer. So I'm not going to talk about how to do things, but I'm going to tell you what we've done and the results that we've gotten. We make what can be described as an industrial cleaning product. It's a very niche product. It's a very small industry. So we are not a big firm with huge resources. So this is not anything I describe is not something that's going to cost a lot of money or you're going to need a huge team to do. But in 2011, it was really where we got started on this, and I went to see a speaker who really opened my eyes, excuse me, to the potential of using your website as a really important marketing tool and not just a online catalog, so to speak. And what we've achieved since then is really remarkable. So for very small companies, again, in the niche market, we generate anywhere from 2 to 5 leads a day that come into the website, and people fill out the Contact Us form. So that doesn't even include who might be calling us directly or emailing us directly. So the actual number of leads coming in is probably higher than that. We have thousands of views to our website every month. And over the course of, the last 10 years or so, or even less, we've built a brand that's really the segment leader. And a lot of this is a result of the work we've done online. And we really look at the website as the hub of our marketing efforts. And everything else is a spoke in that wheel. And those spokes include basically everything we do. Emails generated from our own CRM, emails generated from that we have sent out from industry associations or publications, everything else from links to partner websites, to the webinars, to trade shows, even links to print ad companies that have some presence online. LinkedIn is very important. We're active on LinkedIn and always link back to our website. So everything we do promotes our website as well as whatever that particular effort is promoting. And so the speaker that I went to see in 2011 that I referenced used an expression that I really like, and that was when you're marketing online, especially through your website, you're leaving breadcrumbs out there. And those breadcrumbs will hopefully drive people or lead people to your website. And he used an example, among other things, of if you're communicating with your audience, your customer base, and you're sending out emails or you're having phone calls, that's great. And if you're sharing information that way, as we all do, fantastic. But that information, as soon as it's been transmitted, is gone. So what if you took that information and you put it into some digital form and communicated that on your website? Well, then it would be there forever. And then anybody who liked it and shared it or linked to it or whatever, then you're spreading that message out to everybody in their universe. So it really is a way to exponentially spread even a simple message. So we worked with, of course, SEO, search engine optimization, search engine marketing, where you pay for, search results. Did all those things, and everything, of course, put people back to our website. And then we had even a fairly sophisticated organization that does inbound marketing, where if you come to the website, we'll take note of what you looked at when you came, and then automated emails will go out maybe in a month, and then again in 2 months, and then again in, say, 6 months, on topics that are related to whatever you were looking at. So in order to do this, of course, you have to build some content, and that does take work. But what we did in terms of building content, again, was fairly simple and not very expensive. And going back to those emails and those telephone conversations, anytime you reach out or a customer reaches out to you and you address an issue, almost certainly you're addressing an issue that's of interest to your other customers. So what we started doing is posting a blog post once a week. And again, that's a fair amount of work, but if you divide it up amongst your various staff who are able to do that, it's not terribly cumbersome. And once a week, we would post a blog about some topic that we believe would be of interest to our customers. And it does a lot. So one, customers see it. And these blog posts were simple, sometimes one paragraph, sometimes 3 or 4, but not a white paper or some very lengthy document. Something simple that would convey something of interest. And it does a lot of good things. One is, as you build that library, customers will see your website as a resource, and perhaps more importantly, the search engines will see your website as a living website, so to speak, that's regularly updated, that has fresh content that may be of interest. So you really help your search engine results, in addition to helping the people who are coming to your website for some information. Perhaps the most important thing that you can do, something we did, is work with small videos. Bing is often cited as the second largest search engine in the world, but it's really YouTube. You don't often think of YouTube as a search engine, but that's what it is. And Google loves videos. All the search engines love videos, and viewers love them, and especially short videos that convey something within a minute or two. People will stop. They will look at them, and they don't have to be professionally produced. If you have a good smartphone, you can create excellent-looking videos that are very clear and professional. So take small videos of whatever your product is, or perhaps a salesperson talking about your products, whatever might catch someone's attention and keep them looking for a minute or two. But all of these things that lead back to your website, the website itself, it doesn't go away. So if your website is an online catalog, so to speak, where it just gives your customers information about your product or company, that's fine, very inexpensive, and that I would recommend is the absolute minimum you should do. But if you really want to drive business, drive leads, you need to reach out, and you need to be active with your website, and you need to be sharing content and sharing links and spending time promoting it. Basically everything we do is done by outside experts. So we don't have a huge marketing staff, as I'm sure most of the listeners don't. And in some cases, we've spent a considerable amount of money, but it's not really necessary. The best thing you can do is get a decent website built for you, have it look sharp and professional, and then work on keeping content updated on it. And I would say that if your website, if you are updating your website with things like your trade shows that you're promoting or other things, if you start it, continue it. Because in my opinion, there's almost nothing worse than going to a website, clicking on the news link, and seeing the last entry as a trade show that they did in May of 2016. It just looks like it's not a resource. You kind of, at least I do, kind of turn off that website when I get to that point. So I guess that's really the fundamentals of it, that you want to keep it fresh, you want to keep it relevant, and adding content that promotes your business is great. Adding content that doesn't promote your business but is of interest to your constituency is also great, and maybe in some cases even better. So I can't imagine what our business would have been like without that change in 2011. And it is hard work. It's not huge money, but the payoff is more than worth it.
Thank you,
So with
Joe.
that, Tony, I would say
we appreciate your remarks.
there's a lot of...
You covered my 35 slides in your 8 minutes. So,
well, I did that. If people listen to you and follow what you and Annie have to say, I'm sure they'll get the same results. But it's kind of nice to hear a true life experience with this kind of information. It really is. If you want to grow your business, this is the way to go.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for those remarks. So I'm going to begin my presentation now. One of the things I want to mention, again, we have two people with a disclaimer. I'm not a digital marketing expert either. But over the last, I would say 4 or 5 years, the commercial service has had a large effort in increasing our knowledge base as far as website globalization specifically, and working with our group, or with what we call the International Expansion Blueprint, which our website review that we did for Joe, and I think 40 other Connecticut companies came from. So a lot of the content that I'm presenting to you today came from that working group. And that working group really consists of feedback from our overseas staff that had said a lot of the things Joe had said about U.S. companies' website and what they're lacking. They're not generally globalized. One of the first slides that we have in our normal deck is a picture of a lemonade stand, and your website isn't a lemonade stand where only folks that drive in your neighborhood and see it can view it. If you have a website, everyone in the world can see it. So that's kind of what you should be thinking of. So we're going to talk today a little bit about kind of website globalization and that strategy, and the components we're going to cover together between myself and Annie. Some of these I will cover, and then some of these things Annie will cover: global trends, domain considerations. Talk a little bit, like Joe talked about, a little about search engine optimization, simple enhancements, and those simple enhancements have come from feedback from our overseas posts and companies that have looked at doing business with many U.S. manufacturers. So that's really good feedback that's been brought up, and some of them are really kind of no-brainers and things that you might not think of. So I think you'll find that interesting. And then we'll talk a little bit about translation and internationalization. So global trends, pretty self-explanatory. Everyone uses the internet, right? So a lot of people use the internet, and it's only going to continue to grow. So these stats here show the world's total number currently, and in 2 years what the number will be if we had U.S. penetration rates. So a lot of room for growth in internet users. We already have a lot of internet users, but it's going to continue to grow. Currently, we just updated this yesterday, 3.2 billion internet users worldwide. I think our last one had 2.8, and that was like a year or two ago. So there's been substantial growth. 4.2 billion international e-commerce buyers by 2025. Those are some of the projections. And there's definitely a lot of annual growth with sales in the international e-commerce space. And again, we're going to be talking mainly about the B2B space, so not the B2C. But this is an interesting slide from our e-commerce lab that my colleague James Bledsoe had on his presentation. 57% of online shoppers made online purchases in the past 6 months from an overseas retailer. So this is on the B2C side. So overseas, we're seeing a lot of interest in purchasing products from markets outside of their country, and that phenomenon has been transitioning to the B2B shopping experience. That Amazon type experience is definitely transitioning to the B2B world, and we're going to show a couple slides on that as well. So how has that impacted the B2B world? There was a project done, the B2B e-commerce 300, which are the 300 top e-commerce companies in the world, and their export their sales data, for e-commerce sales. So we're looking at 2014 and 2015 here, and you have $478 billion in sales worldwide, which is a 12.7% increase. And then some of the companies on the bottom you'll see there, these are large companies, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and wholesalers, but the numbers are quite astounding. Key takeaways here is non-retail businesses are more and more involved in e-commerce. So it's not just the B2C world, it's becoming more and more the B2B world as well, with large number of sales. So another slide I thought, obviously in Connecticut, large aerospace and defense space, we're looking at $35 billion in 2015 for e-commerce sales through B2B channels. So the numbers continuing to grow year after year. So something definitely to focus on. Now we're going to transition to domain considerations. So as we're looking at our domain considerations, and I think I learned this from Annie a couple of years ago. She has her 5% rule, which I'm sure she's going to cover in detail. But I think you look at this from your web stats as well, not just for translation, but if you have sales 5% for a certain market, it might be time for you to consider offering something under your domain considerations for that country. If it's a top-level country domain, like we see on the top of this slide here for France, if it's .fr, or if it's a few other options that we're going to cover in a second. But just on the domain considerations for top-level domain, we get this question a lot when we do our reviews as companies are interested in maybe having that country top-level domain, but they really need to understand what the local requirements are to register that. So this is just an example for France here, and we see that there is a local presence in France that's required, okay, and there's an EU trademark with local France admin and contact. So you need to understand kind of what the rules and regulations are and the requirements before you start registering those domains, because it might not be something you're able to do. Other options, and what we personally see a lot, what I see a lot is the good option here is that subfolder, so that company.com / whatever the market might be, if it's France or Colombia or whatever it might be. So I think I see that more than really anything as I'm reviewing companies' websites, and they'll have a sub-page for that market specifically. Another acceptable option, I have not personally seen it a lot, is the subdomain, so the country before your company's website.com. But again, we're saying it's not as SEO friendly as the other two options for sure. And the country top-level domain is going to be your most SEO friendly option. Search engine optimization. So, Bing and Google and Yahoo, these are not the only search engines in the world. So there are a lot of other search engines. So depending on where you're doing business overseas, you really want to know what the most popular search engine is. We show an example here of Baidu, which is the most popular search engine in China, and then Korea on the bottom, Naver, which is the most popular search engine there. So we're going to want to make sure that we're registering with those search engines specifically. And the same thing with, with the different Google search engines, if it's Google Spain versus kind of the Google main, the .com. So registering your domain is very important. So how do the search engines work, though? So they're really looking at, as Joe was saying, they're looking at the information on your website, that content, that fresh content. They're looking at keywords, they're looking at meta tags and all those things as well. The link backs are extremely important. But at the end of the day, the content on your website's king. Keep it fresh. If you're going to do something, I think Joe said it great. You have this trade events portion on your main homepage. Keep it up to date on what you're doing, The trade shows you're going to, the booths you're going to be inviting people to, keep it up to date. Don't show something that's 2 or 3 years old. Spider-Eyed View Search, there's a lot of different tools out there. I'm not going to go into huge detail, but if you want to see what the keywords that are popping up from your website, you can use something like this search engine spider simulator, and it'll pull out kind of the keywords from your website, and you can see, is your company being accurately represented from the search engine as far as the information it's pulling. Keys to SEO success. We just talked about it, listing yourself and registering specifically your sitemap, right? Not just your homepage with the various search engines. So that information, the search engines can look at that information and scour your website for keywords when it's being searched. Talked about content's king, original content that you can come up with. It's not easy to have white papers written often, but if you can do a blog post like Joe was saying every week or two and come up with a rotation of your employees to populate that information so it keeps relevant. If you are using social media, LinkedIn pages, get a post once a week, even if it's about an employee success or somebody that's been there a certain amount of years, or if it's something related to your product line. Keep that information up to date so it shows that you're an active user. Link backs are extremely important. So anything you can do, if you did a webinar, say with an organization, a trade association, and they were promoting, if they can promote that with your name and your URL attached to your company, so it's connected and you can get that backlink that's good. If it's any media outlets, try to get those URLs shared on both sides when you're doing things with different resources.
Tony, can I just add one thing to content
Absolutely.
really quick? Because
Yep.
I don't think I'll be able to cover it in my portion. A really great strategy that we use as far as coming up with new blog post ideas and everything is we work closely with sales and our customer service reps who are talking to our clients, and we just compile a list of the top 50 questions that we get asked. The most frequently asked questions, start writing those down, and it may be really kind of obvious and something that you overlook because it's just so second nature to you of your business. But if people keep asking you that over the phone, they're probably searching for it online as well. So that's kind of just a great place to start and something easy that your customers are kind of feeding you your content. So they can even be a couple paragraphs like Joe had mentioned. It doesn't have to be crazy, but that's always really great for SEO, and you're putting information out there that people are looking for.
Oh, that's great. No, thank you, Annie, on that. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Just the language that folks are searching, our fourth bullet point here. So if you are registered with, Google Czech Republic or Google Spain, having it obviously in that language, if the person's not typing it in English, is obviously going to be important to your SEO. And then number 5 is hire a professional. Paid search. I think we all know this, kind of our paid and organic, how SEOs work, but obviously the paid searches are going to be on the top of the page and on the top right, and then your organic searches, which you're trying to get yourself as high as can with backlinks and your quality updated content and things that you're doing, get yourself boosted on there. But do a search and see where you fall on the different search engines. There's different tools for SEO Checkup. So a part of our search engine, our website Globalization Review, we use this SEO Site Checkup. if anyone needs it done, I'm happy to pull the report for you. Just you can send me a note with your URL, and I can send you this. And this is just a really good way to see where you fall. What have you passed on? What are you failing on? Some of it gets a little bit technical, but it'll tell you as well how to fix it. A lot of these different tools will explain how you can fix certain things that might be broken, if it's links or you're not mobile friendly maybe, or you have it tells you the links that are specifically broken on your website. So those are a lot of things to consider as you're moving forward with globalizing your website or revamping your website. Simple enhancements. From our folks overseas, number one for U.S. manufacturers was not really announcing that you're open for international business somehow. So if it's having this generic international inquiries at the top of your page, or having a language drop down, not using flags, right, Annie? So using the language of the country, but showing that you're open for international business. It's extremely important, and we tend to see a lot of the companies, as far as what we've done reviews and I work with, that don't necessarily do that right on their homepage. So something we definitely want to see. I think this is something too that comes up quite a bit is the contact us page. So having a direct contact that they can reach out to with an email address. I think a lot of us use the info at or sales at company.com so they can reach out to that person. It's not really a personal touch. So really the best strategy is to have a salesperson that they can contact by name at the company. And then also on that page, contact us considering your full address, no abbreviations, spell out your state, put United States next to it. Direct dial phone numbers is another thing we see a lot. Not necessarily, a lot of them will do a toll-free number, which, if you're outside of the country, you can't call in on. So use your international dial code format +1 area code number. That's a best practice. Yep, that one I'm going to jump right here. So I think the one thing when I see this slide, and this is the one that I would say is not the best practice, and the next one I'm going to show you is, so this is, everything's required on here, right? So all the fields are required. Your first name, last name, number of characters for international audience is pretty slim, so there's not a lot of space there. And then, one thing, what does, ZIP stand for? A lot of folks overseas, I think if you thought about it, do you even know what ZIP stands for? It's Zone Improvement Plan. So if you have things like that that might not necessarily be used overseas, consider putting postal codes, but don't make every field required. It's going to go to our next one. So kind of our best practice option here for a form. Very few required fields, if any. I think this one doesn't show any. If it was me, I probably would at least do email address, but some other important drop-downs are state, country, phone number, and fax, and then why they're contacting you. Some companies on the country option, due to compliance reasons, they have eliminated some countries if they're not interested in doing business there. That is something that I've heard from companies prior in years past. So if that's something that you want to eliminate a country for compliance reason, you can't do business there, you can edit that in your drop down as well. Formats, longer lines for international users. Depending on the area of the world, culturally, specifically Middle East, the names could be a lot longer. So allow plenty of digits that they can add, and also if they can cross the letters and numbers if needed. So you see a couple examples on the bottom when the numbers and letters are kind of in the line together. So think about the countries that you might be doing business in and allow for them to fill that information in appropriately. Time zones, just briefly, when is your office open? For your specific time zones, obviously important, but also consider having an option for Greenwich Mean Time. So depending on where a person is in the world, they can correlate exactly what time that is based off of Greenwich Mean Time. Dates. So I was in the Coast Guard for a few years, and we wrote dates. We did the day first, then we did the month, then we did the year. So common convention in the U.S., though, is your month, day, year. So it can be really confusing. So what we recommend is if you're using dates on white papers or different things on your website, just spell it out so it's very straightforward, because everyone does it a little bit differently. So if you spell it out, that'll eliminate any type of confusion. Metric system, so if you have different weights and measurements on your site, not every country obviously uses our convention, the U.S. the imperial system. Only a few countries in the world do. So consider having that converted on your website. If you're selling, plugs and wires, same thing for the specific voltage and megahertz, depending on the markets in the world you're doing business with. Consider having those international formats and standards translated to different systems. Mobile friendly. I think it was 2014, I don't remember the year, but Google search engine, I think most search engines now are requiring that your website is mobile friendly. You can check that obviously on your site, or if you do an SEO checkup, that'll pop up as a pass-fail. If you do not pass that, that's really going to bump you down in the organic search rankings. So really consider, having a mobile-friendly website. Last two slides here. So where can you find more resources from the Commerce Department on e-commerce and for B2B and B2C? Our James Bledsoe's the director of the e-commerce lab out of Washington State, and he leads this effort. But that team there puts a lot of good information up on digital strategies, cross-border e-commerce, and different resources available for U.S. companies. So consider that, and I will send this out as well so you can take a look at the resources available. Last thing I'm going to mention, and most states have this, if for some reason you're from out of state and you're on this, the STEP grant. So the STEP grant is available, and while I'm finishing this slide, I'm going to ask Amy if she can switch to her presentation. But eligible expenses are different translation interpreter fees, commerce services, international materials for collateral translation, and other things. So you can reach out to your state's economic development arm in Connecticut. It's the Connecticut DECD. If you search Connecticut DECD STEP program, you'll find all the information on that. And if you have questions on that, you can also reach out to me. But definitely a good thing to consider as you're doing some of these projects. I am going to turn it over to Annie at this time, and then we will take questions at the end. Go ahead, Annie.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tony. And thank you, everyone. So, I'm going to dive into more specific tactics around localizing your website and the translation side of things. First, I wanted to give you a little bit of background of myself and my company. ITI Interpreters and Translators, Inc. has been in business for over 33 years, and our mission is to provide multicultural language services to support and enable companies in working internationally, as well as those companies that are working domestically among the multilingual population. And myself, I've worked with ITI for 8 years now, and across that span, I've worked across the entire company. So I've been in sales, I've been an account manager, working really closely with clients. I've worked as a translation department manager, managing those document translation projects, and also in the interpreting department where I scheduled interpreters, recruited interpreters, and that's all kind of the spoken language side of things. And so now I've been able to, I always did marketing things when I was in those other roles, and now I'm fully in our marketing department full-time for the past 3.5 years or so as a brand strategist, and kind of able to take all that knowledge and experience and kind of share it with people like you and on our website and managing the digital side of things. I really love website localization and working internationally. It's a really fun topic, so I'm excited to kind of dive in and give you guys some more details on that and how you can use it to expand your business. So I kind of structured the presentation in 2 halves. So translation we'll start out with, and this is just the translation of just like text, words, and content. And then when we talk about localization or internationalization, globalization, that's kind of looking at the big picture. So we'll be specifically talking about website localization in this presentation. So we're looking at the website as a whole. So that includes not just what's written on your website, but the types of images, the colors, the structure. So that's like Tony was talking about, the domain structure, the numerical values, all of those factors go into localizing your website. So localization doesn't even really need to be to another language. You can localize your website English to English to be ready for the UK. So you're updating all of the currencies, the times, things like that. But for this purpose, we'll obviously be talking about localizing it, taking into account both translation as well as everything else that goes into it. So first I just want to address the always elephant in the room when we talk about translation, and that's machine translation. I feel like nowadays there's a more firm understanding. Maybe I'm a little too close in the industry, but it seems like more and more people who aren't even in the language industry are kind of understanding that it's not the best. Something like Google or Bing Translate is really not. It's not a professional level solution. It can be great for yourself personally. You're traveling abroad, anything like that. But when you need translation for your business, you want to present yourself in the most professional manner and really make sure that everything is tightened up and correct and being conveyed in the same exact way that you intended it to. Especially with languages such as the Asian languages, because it's so drastically different from the Romance languages, it really confuses things. These machine translations, although there is AI and they're constantly learning and improving, there's still no context around what it's translating. It doesn't understand slang. It doesn't take into consideration any cultural relevance, and it doesn't really get to the core of what your message's intent. So I love these kind of translation fail examples. We post these on our social media all the time. And the ones on the outside are kind of funny, might be just a typo. I mean, I don't know for sure that those were machine translations, but kind of, could be something you don't want to be said. I think the one in the middle is a really great example of what that almost certainly was machine translation, because I've talked to, you see a lot of funny signs like this coming out of Asia, whether it's like China, Vietnam, Korea, and it sounds really funny to us, but it actually is correct. That's like a very, very direct translation of what it said. It's just that a machine doesn't really understand, especially with, some place like China, that it's such an ancient culture that it's just directly translating it. They sometimes have more kind of what we would consider like a more artistic and creative way of conveying these ideas and messages, which really will take a human touch to make that relevant and understandable to someone that speaks English. And in correlation with your website, most importantly, of why you don't want to just kind of translate your website content and then paste it into your content management system is because it's not going to be the most accurate translation. There's surely going to be errors. It might, switch up the syntax and things like that. A big thing, as we've been saying, content is king with search engines, and if it's seen as poor content, that's going to negatively affect your ranking. So big thing here is it will have a negative impact on your SEO if you're just kind of copying and pasting with no human proofreading and sharpening it up. So when you're translating your website, go with a team of professionals. This is what we do all day, every day. We live and breathe translation and communication. We've have decades of experience and work with professional translators in the country that you're targeting, have sharp quality procedures, and at the end of the day, really work as your partner in communication and brand expansion to make sure that your representation in this new language is exactly how you want it and mirrors what you're putting out in English. So now I want to dive in. It's kind of a layer deeper. So there's translation, kind of, standard translation. And then this is kind of moving to the localization side, because there can be localization of imagery and the overall picture, but you can also localize the text. And Transcreation is kind of like one more level deeper. It's a very creative type of translation. I have these examples here, which are pretty funny, and it's very much used for things like this. So like a slogan, a tagline, something that isn't going to directly translate. You can directly translate it probably, which these were kind of more direct translations, but it's just not going to really make much sense in a different language with people who are residing in a different culture. So it's basically the process of adapting content for a new target audience in a foreign language. So you're recreating the text in its essence, and the outcome will usually differ significantly from the original, but it's the intent that remains the same. So I have this kind of more long-winded definition on the slide. We'll send you guys this slide, so I wanted to get it up there. But it's basically getting the essence out, and this is a lot of times in these types of presentations, we'll get questions about back translation and whether it's a good idea, and I think this is the perfect example of why. If you're using back translation, which is, if you're unaware, when, say you have a sentence in English that's come alive with Pepsi, and then you translate it into Chinese, we would send it to another translator, just the Chinese translation, and they would translate it back into English. And that is a requirement sometimes for more like scientific organizations, and when you're submitting to the government. There's rare little industries where they have to have back translation, but it's not what I like to just get across is that it's not a proofreading tool, because most of the time the translation isn't going to directly translate back exactly word for word what the source text was, and that doesn't mean that it's wrong. Especially with two different sets of eyes on it, as long as the same intent is there. So it can come across drastically different, but it's still getting your message across with something more creative, such as Transcreation. Also on the translation front, this is really applicable to both your website, but also if you're translating anything that have print materials such as brochures, sales sheets, things like that, especially that might have print parameters. Just something to consider and understand is that when you're translating, there can be a significant expansion or shrinkage from English. So when you're going English to something like Spanish, it will usually expand. It'll take more words, more letters to say the same thing. As when you're going into Asian languages, it typically shrinks. And I think this is kind of a great example. The word speed in German. German is notoriously a very, very long word. Yet in Chinese, it's just one character. So it's just something to keep in mind and understand. Designs may have to be slightly altered to accommodate that. And also, when it comes to your written content, I always like to stress to make sure that you're happy with it in English. Make sure that it's up to date. If you wrote it years ago, before you spend the money and effort to get it translated, make sure it's up to date and that you're super happy with it, because garbage in, garbage out is kind of a popular phrase in our industry. A translator can only do so much to make the translated text kind of sound nice and mirror what you wanted it to say. But they can fix a typo here and there. They'll probably understand, but I like to I think it's important to explain that if it's not kind of clear and concise, then the translators kind of has to figure out on their own what you're trying to say. So make sure it's written in a clear way, it's concise, it's to the point, it's very clear what you want everything to say and what you're getting across, and that's kind of just important in any language, right? You want your marketing text in English to be kind of very clear. So spend some time beforehand proofreading and reviewing all of the content that you're going to get translated before you start working to actually get it translated. So a couple of tips for preparing your content for translation. Like I said, definitely proofread, edit, do what you need to do to make sure that it's in tip-top shape. Determine what needs to be translated, of course, on your website, any supporting documentation or media such as videos, things like that. Source files, web content is going to be translated and sent back and forth between us in a variety of mediums, but if you have maybe PDF downloads, if you have the original design file for that, videos, so just source files will make it easier for a language service company to work with the files. The things don't need to be completely recreated, which I'll talk about budget in a later slide, but it just will kind of make the whole process quicker, easier, and eliminate some additional costs if things need to be recreated. Format documents, planning for text manipulation, that's what I was talking about, the expansion and shrinkage. Providing subject matter information so that there's context for what we're translating. And then glossary creation, style guides. So kind of these last two bullets is something that I know that ourselves as a company, we do work to be a partner with you. So we're big on building a relationship and getting to intimately know your company, your audience, who you're selling to. So that we'll be able to kind of relay to our translators so that we're fully immersed in your world and we can provide the best translation and localization as possible. Glossary creation and style guides, those are all kind of little tools that we can create for you. So if you have kind of very company-specific or industry-specific terminology, you have a tagline, we can kind of work with you to choose the best translation possible, and then we'll store that in a glossary. Style Guides has a lot of the technical points of your website, so color codes, all of that stuff. These are all just kind of creating a record for your company. That way it ensures consistency and accuracy over time, and as we kind of work together, it's easier. We know who we're working with. We can kind of shoot things back and forth. We have everything on file. It's not like you have to kind of start from scratch every new project explaining everything. Multilingual SEO, so we've all three of us now touched on SEO, so clearly it is very important. So I'll kind of focus on the multilingual side of things. Basically, it's going to be a very similar strategy as your strategy in English, but it's just applying it to a new language. And what your keywords may be in English, in a different language, it's not just about translating your keywords, which I think sometimes a lot of people think is, what you need to do. What a keyword in English may be totally different than the keyword in Vietnamese. In Vietnam, they may be searching in a different way. So that's one big thing. There's the technical side, so the language settings, the URL structure, so the domain structure that Tony spoke about, and then incorporating those keywords into content and just getting it all technically fit for this new market and new country that you're targeting. And the best way to really do that is to just work with a partner who has resources in country, and that's also another place where the glossary can come in handy, kind of storing all of the keyword translations and things of that nature. So some of the high-level budget factors that I wanted to address, and this kind of, I like to look at it as kind of an audit that you can perform on your own before kind of just jumping into anything. I don't know if it's just me, but I'm a really, really big planner before making any kind of purchase, business-wise, personal-wise, like to kind of get a lay of the land. That way I know that I'm getting what I need for the best price possible. And just so what goes into a translation project budget and quote is the first and foremost obvious is languages. How many languages are you translating into? Which ones? Content. How much content do you have? What type of content? Is it static or dynamic? So example of static might be your About Us page. Some of the product pages might be kind of core, long-standing products, but maybe you have new products that you add quarterly or yearly. Maybe you want to translate some of your blog posts. So getting kind of an understanding of, okay, we have 5 website pages that we want to translate, and then maybe we'll have 3 additional every month, 3 additional blog posts or social media posts. So that's something you can kind of lay out so that when you're talking to a company like ourselves, we can help you get an idea of what those costs may look like, and that can just really help you to budget long term. The deliverables, that's kind of the types of files that we'll be working with. I mentioned source files, always ideal. Is it just going to be text? Do you have images that maybe images might have text or in that might need to be translated and recreated or edited? Videos, if they're in English, we can recreate that video so that it has either subtitles or voiceovers. So what beyond just the text you have going on that you might want to localize for a new country. And so that content audit I was talking about is kind of segmenting it into the 2 buckets. The written content, pretty straightforward and easy, but then what type of visual content do you have that may be worth recreating? Okay, so site design, just some high-level recommendations here. It's having a search function and a site index. Those are also both really good for SEO. A site index just breaks down exactly all the pages on your website. So if you don't have that, that's a good thing to have on just your regular website now. Search functionality, again, that makes it easier to use. Search engines love that. Once you offer multiple languages, make it very easy. I know this graphic might be a little hard to see, but the little drop-down menu on the top right, this is just their homepage. This is one of our clients. The drop-down in the top right corner is select language. So it's, it's right there. This is a very clear homepage. It has their kind of, mission statement, their value add right front and center, so you know what they do. And then as you scroll down, you can see all the details. So I love that example. Text-only option. We're really used to having the fastest internet here, and we get really, really frustrated if it even takes like 4 seconds for a website to load or an app to load. But not every country, especially developing countries, have the same internet connection that we do. A lot of them, it's a much slower connection, and even some countries have to pay for the amount of time connected to the internet. So speed of your site is also an SEO factor, so you want it to be very quick and pretty agile. But a text-only option could be great. And again, this is something, it's not always necessary, but looking at where you're doing business and where you want to target, maybe that would be a good option for you. Or at least just trimming it down a little bit more, maybe removing some images, things, and that's something you can look at in more detail. But I think it's very important to know that not everybody has as fast as internet as we do. And then another kind of straightforward marketing thing, just, having the critical information at the top to eliminate as much scrolling. You want it to be easy to use, straight to the point of what you do and the value that you provide. And then ADA compliance. We've been doing a ton of work with ADA compliance with our clients and ourselves beyond just like spoken language translation. We work with deaf and hard of hearing clients and providing sign language interpreters. So it's a big thing on websites as well. There's a lot of different regulations around having your website accessible for deaf or blind people that are navigating the internet. And other countries, it's not just the U.S., other countries, some of them are very strict with ADA compliance, and they have even a different set of regulations from what we have in the U.S. So it's not something, that we're always thinking about, but it's really, really important. So just something to keep in mind and even assess your website now as it is, and is it accessible to anyone that may be searching for it.
Annie, can you just mention the drop-down for the language regarding the use of flags and countries?
Yeah.
That are the written out?
Yeah, I have a slide on that in like the next 2 slides, and I'll mention the flags because I didn't have that in there. So I will. Yeah, thank you. So quickly, just some examples here on site design. This is an Asian language website. I wouldn't know where to go to translate this, so this might be what some of our English websites look like, most likely to Chinese or other Asian countries, total foreign world. This one is much clearer, so English right up there, you can translate it. Language listings, what Tony was just describing. On the left-hand side, it's just super inconsistent. So the best practice with language listings is to write out the language in that language. So Spanish would be Espanol, or if it's the country name. And even going in with country names and flags, it's just like the more safer, more simple way to do it is to just write out the language names. It's really become kind of a faux pas, so to say, to have any flags associated with a language, because so many languages are spoken in multiple countries. And so just eliminate any kind of confusion. Some people in some cultures and everything take that really personally. I know I even honestly get annoying when it's English and there's a British flag. It's like, what? It's not only spoken in Britain. It just makes no sense to me. So keep it simple, to the point, and I think that's what I really like to get across with a lot of this. I know we're throwing a lot at you, but just keep things simple. You can start kind of smaller, and I'll kind of go into that in the next way, but when you're offering the different languages, just provide it, and it can be in English and in the target language, but offer it in that way, because you can see, especially like Japan on the left-hand example, Japan is Japanese is a different script, so if they don't really speak any English at all, they might have a hard time even finding their language. So yeah, just keep it simple. Less is more starting out. You don't need to be too overwhelmed where they're with you every step of the way, and you don't have to translate the entire site immediately. You can create a microsite, so you're just translating the key pages, maybe your home page, about page, and then, of course, the most important product and service pages. And I like to kind of just add a quick note about the About Us page is that here in the U.S., they don't get the About pages, don't really get a ton of traffic, but a lot of times in other countries, and our business style is, of course, relationships matter and they're very important, but we tend to put kind of the deal and the outcome before that, whereas in other countries, the relationship is first and foremost the most important thing. So they like to see this goes hand in hand with Tony mentioning, having an actual person as your sales contact. It's a lot more personal. It makes a lot of people feel just a lot more comfortable doing business when there's like a face behind the company. They're not just, talking to a machine or anything. It's personalized, and that is what is the norm in a lot of other countries. So definitely update your About Us page if you need to. If there is one international sales rep, maybe put a picture of them, with their name and their contact info. Really important. And if a microsite even seems like too much of a place to start, you can just create a landing page, one big landing page where it's just one web page. You include all of the most important information, contact info, description. So you can almost have the same information that you have on that microsite, but just on one long web page. So there's always options. There's flexibility. We can work with whatever your objectives and capabilities at this time are. Then global template for consistency, again, kind of ease of use. It helps across all boards. So it's just an example from Nivea that there's a research company out there who is very heavily involved in the language industry called BYTE, B-Y-T-E, Level of Research. And John Juncker is the guy who runs all of it. He puts out a lot of really awesome information on website globalization and localization. If you want to look that up on your own, I have a book by him that I read, and every year he puts out a web globalization report card, so ranking the top websites that do the best job internationally. Wikipedia is always number one, which kind of makes sense. I mean, it's all text, but the way the technical structure is formatted makes it easy for any country. Nivea was in the top 3 this year, so that's why I wanted to show them. As an example, you can see it's the same format, it's just the language and everything that they're switching out. And I'm sure if you dive deeper, there's some more variances between them. And then another one, just Apple. You can see it's, the same template. That way you're kind of plugging and playing, changing up the text, changing out photos if you need to. We're getting close. Yeah, we're at time here. So I'm going to kind of try to run through these last few slides, just kind of addressing a few more localization factors. Colors really, the interpretation of colors really varies drastically across cultures. I have some examples there. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but it's just something to understand and keep in mind. It's not something you have to totally do a rebrand and really stress yourself out of, but it's an awareness of it and knowing that if a color may have like a negative connotation in one culture. Like I know in the Middle East, it's escaping me right now, but blue and green are associated with certain religions there. So if you're doing something like that where it's kind of a tumultuous culture and like power struggle, then you might kind of want to avoid them or just make sure they're not very prominent. Types of photos. So what kind of photos do you have? Are they just of the product? You're probably good. If you have a lot of photos of people in it, are there males in the photo, females? What, their gender, nationality, what they look like. If, again, in like the Middle East, if there's women in some of your photos and they don't have on traditional like Middle Eastern garb, it may be better to just kind of avoid any situations that can have a little bit of like tension behind them. The style of your website, whether it's text heavy or image heavy, the focus of your website, whether you're focusing on just the product, the value, the service that you provide. These are all really important things that you need to take into consideration, and that when you're working at least with a company like ourselves, that will really consult very closely with you on and, talk about what your target market, what their preferences are, and how we can accommodate that. And then finally, just, say you translate your website, it's live, it's optimized, now the leads and phone calls start coming in. If they don't have the best English-speaking capabilities, how are you going to work with them and service them? There are plenty of options. There's remote interpreting options, so whether over the phone or video for conference calls or just phone calls, that's available on demand. In-person interpreters, once you get those in-person meetings or you're meeting them at a trade show, they can be there with you to interpret during meetings. Document translation, so beyond the website content, emails, contracts, legal forms, manuals, blueprints. Of course, the website and software localization, so that includes any videos, if there's any software, technical localization, and then the digital media, any other media localization that you may need. And we support all of that in over 200 languages. And we also, if you want to learn a little bit more, have a bunch of resources on our website. We have a blog that's updated really regularly. We have a couple that I've listed here that we created specifically for manufacturers, also applicable to aerospace manufacturers, to kind of help you dive a little bit deeper into this whole process, audit your website, develop your goals, and then kind of going from there. So that's everything from me. Thank you all so much. Some of our contact information, and we'll make sure that this gets sent out to you as well.
Thank you, Annie. Appreciate that. We started a few minutes late, so we'll see if we have a couple questions. I want to thank Joe Sorrell as well from Rapid Purge. Let's see if the operator can open the line for questions at this time. Annie, you can keep that up if you want. It's up to you, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Victor, can you prompt us for questions, please?
Absolutely. We will now begin a question and answer session. To ask a question from the phone lines, please press *1, ensure your phone is unmuted, and record your name when prompted. To withdraw your question, press *2. One moment, please, for incoming questions.
While we're waiting for the first question, which is standard, takes a few seconds at least, I just wanted to say, thank you to Joe and Annie for doing this today, taking their time out of their schedule to present. We will send a copy of the presentations. I'm going to work with Annie on getting a final copy of her presentation, and then I will send my full presentation with like another 40 slides or so. So it's a lot of information you'll receive, and we'll try to send you the recorded version with that email tomorrow morning when everything's buttoned up. Victor, do we have any questions?
There are no questions in queue at this time, sir.
I'm going to have Annie. Annie, can you just talk briefly before we go about your 5% rule? I know you didn't.
Right. Yeah, I actually did take that slide out because I thought you were covering it more. But yeah, so 5% rule, basically when you're assessing, so you might already know countries that you want to target, but say you're just looking for opportunity and new places to grow. A good way to do that is going into your Google Analytics, which we didn't really address here, but it's pretty standard. If you don't have that set up with your website, you definitely have to do that. You can go into your Google Analytics and see where your traffic is coming from, and there's a spot where you can see which countries it's coming from. And that's always really cool data to take a look at because you can be surprised a lot. So what our 5% rule is if you look at your analytics, and you can do it for like a year, 6 months or something like that, do a longer time frame. If 5% of your website traffic is coming from another country that you're currently is not on your radar, or maybe it is, you've been considering it, that kind of should be like a little bit of a trigger to you of like, this is something we need to look into more, because they're already finding you, they're going to your website without maybe very little effort on your part. So if you put a little bit of effort and a little push to really target them, then that can just continue increasing. That's kind of another way to identify new opportunities and really take advantage of traffic that's already coming your way and really bank on that.
Thank you, Annie.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any questions?
At this time, I am showing no questions.
Joe, are you still on with us? No? All right. All right, everyone. We're in a few minutes over, so we thank you for being patient with us. Thank you, Joe and Annie, for presenting today. If you need anything from me, you can reach me at anthony.sargis@trade.gov, but I will send an email tomorrow morning with our final slide decks and a copy of the net replay link that will be available for at least a couple weeks, and then we'll try to get the recorded version on our YouTube page as well. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you. This concludes today's conference call. You may go ahead and disconnect at this time.